Hey, well, looks like we're at the top of the hour. Why don't we start our discussion today? Thank you for joining us for another one of our wealth strategy team sessions where we dive into different advanced planning topics, financial planning topics, investment strategies. And we have a very powerful one, very interesting one, and very timely one today. We're talking about non-qualified deferred compensation plans and the strategies revolving around those. So this is for listeners or viewers, this is a topic that doesn't apply to a lot of people. It's a selective benefit. That's one of the things that makes it fairly unique. Often managers, executives, highly compensated folks at large corporations may have access to this plan. Or it's also a very interesting strategy for small business owners looking to attract, reward, recruit key employees and personnel. But even there, generally where we're seeing it used is not with pass-through business entities, more on C corporations. So it's a fairly selective benefit by design. In fact, my understanding is that part of what makes it work is that it is really offered to those thought to maybe have a bit more financial acumen and wherewithal to withstand the specific risk as opposed to general employee population. So this is a fairly detailed and complex topic. And so, as with all these sessions, but especially here, you need to consult your own advisory team, tax, legal, financial advisors. Each company has unique structure to their plan. So the devil is in the details often in terms of the plan design and the documents. So it's an area where you really need to do your own research and get expert advice in terms of if participating in a non-qualified deferred compensation plan makes sense. And then a lot of things we're going to be talking today is a lot of those decision points: how much, when, what the payout is, what the investments look like inside the plan. And of course, you can always give us a call at the office. We're happy to work with people on a specific one-to-one basis when we really understand their situation and engage in an advisory relationship. So joining me today, I should say, I'm Scott Oeth, certified financial planner and investment advisor representative, and have Kevin O'Laughlin and Derek Kecho, both very sharp, experienced certified financial planners in their own right. And we work together as a team practice. And in part, why we're doing this is we work with a lot of corporate executives, and they often have access to these non-qualified deferred compensation plans, sometimes called executive deferred compensation plans, or EDCP is often the lingo in certain companies, SERP, or even just deferred comp. So there's a fair amount of fluidity in this as opposed to things like 401k plans, which are much more specifically defined. So, with that, maybe just there's a lot we could talk about in this topic, but what we really want to focus on is, the decision points coming up primarily for corporate executives decide if they want to participate in these plans for, next year, and how that wraps into their overall plan and planning strategies. But maybe just as a high level, non-qualified deferred compensation plans are a selective benefit that is entered into a written agreement between an employer and an employee stating that they do not want to receive compensation for services earned in the year that it's earned. It's going to be paid out at a later date in time. And these plans, even though I say there is a fair amount of fluidity or flexibility in the design, following the wake of a lot of the financial crisis that came out of the early 2000s, collapse of Enron, WorldCom, companies like that. There's a series of tax law, 409A, that really got a lot more specific in the design of these plans and the structure, and limited some of the flexibility, like being able to hold them in offshore trust or being able to decide which one to defer right up until a bonus was paid. So, but the plans, if someone decides, hey, I'm doing work now, but I'm at a high tax rate now, I don't need these extra dollars, I want to build for the future. Maybe there's a potential for tax rate arbitrage by deferring and not taking those dollars now, but drawing them out at a later point in time. It can be very attractive. We talk about a number of points around that, primarily that tax rate arbitrage and wealth accumulation, and then some of the diversifying type strategies. We're often working with people where they have concentrated blocks of company stock, a variety of formats, restricted stock, stock options, stock coming from those things, and how do we unwind those, and how might a deferred compensation plan play into that? So with that, there's just a few terms I think that maybe we'll just touch on very briefly. If you have more questions, you can always reach out to us directly, or again, some of these are very much legal questions or tax law questions, but there's concept of constructive receipt in the tax law, and that is to make these plans work. The employee cannot come into constructive receipt of the dollars, so they need to, in the year before they would be paid out or earned, say, I'll do this work, but I don't want to be paid on it, either for the salary and bonus. The plans, so that it doesn't create a current taxable event, there needs to be a substantial risk of forfeiture, and that's something I think we'll come back to later on, is some of the very specific risk and constraints with these types of plans. While there's a lot of flexibility, there's some very serious considerations and constraints to evaluate before committing dollars to those. If it's basically, if it's deemed that, like, hey, you've earned the money, it's yours, you're going to be taxed on it. So the dollars need to have some credit or risk there. That's a general unfunded unsecured promise to pay by the employer, and that's something that is very important that people understand and think through their comfort level, leaving dollars sitting on the company books to be paid out at a later point. So there's a couple different plan designs. You'll hear the term. I feel like I don't hear it maybe as much anymore, but SERP plan, supplemental executive retirement plan. Those plans can look like a pension plan where the company's making all the contributions. They can look more like a defined contribution plan where it's a set dollar amount each year as opposed to funding some future benefit. There's 401k lookalike or restoration plans. I think that's what we're focusing on more here. But with those varieties, I think just one of the big things is very simply, using these plans for general wealth accumulation. And Derek, you've been working with us for a year now, and you have a lot of experience in high net worth private banking and in wealth management yourself. I mean, you want to share with us a bit about thoughts about just generally using these plans as an accumulation vehicle?
Yeah, of course. So, as Scott mentioned, generally these plans are meant to incentivize productive behavior from employees and reward them for their continued employment. So they are a nice addition to your typical savings vehicles that you get through work, such as a traditional 401k or what have you. But, we often see these plans used to fund future financial goals and also help with tax strategies, as mentioned. But, for an example of how one of these plans might fit into your picture is if you have a specific financial goal that you're trying to reach. So, for instance, if you know where you're retiring in 10 years, you have some big plans for retirement. Maybe you want to buy that second home. Maybe you want to buy that boat. This type of plan can help you systematically save that extra money, kind of beyond the deferral limits that your 401k plan is going to have. And then you get to elect how those funds are dispersed to you over a period of time after you separate from service from your company. So within that plan, the deferred comp plans, those funds are invested, and the growth on those investments are deferred, like it would be in a traditional 401k or IRA. And the money is only taxed to you once it starts flowing out of the plan. And then another thing I thought of with regard to these is, these can be used for high executive earners to prevent lifestyle creep. So say you're at a good income level and you get a nice bump up in compensation levels. You don't want to spend that. You don't want to see that hit the checking account. This can be kind of a nice forced savings vehicle to stash away those extra dollars. So those are just a couple thoughts on how these plans can be helpful and how they can be used if they're available to you.
Yeah, a couple thoughts, but really powerful ones. I think we have fun diving into the, things like tax leverage or option leverage or things that feel more technical. But what you just said there, the lifestyle creep, that is huge. And the 401k plan limits, the happily 401k plan limits, keep getting inflationary type boost, and people can put a fair amount of money in there. But if you are a high earner, that proportion that you're able to save, if you're planning for your retirement or future goals, is comparatively much less. You get capped out by those contribution limits. I think do you have those at hand, Derek? Where are we at?
Yeah. So for this tax year, for 2023, the deferral limit, the amount of money that you can put away in your 401k is $22,500. And if you're 50 and over, you can put an additional 7,500 into the plan. Your total contribution between your contributions, the one I just mentioned, and the employer can be $66,000 a year total. So that's you're limited to how much you can put in that plan. So this is a nice extra benefit for employees that have it.
Right. So tax law limits in 401k or a combined 401k and profit sharing plan. And if you have, even a pretty healthy income, that can provide a nice, what we'd consider a replacement ratio, looking at how much you're able to, put away for your retirement. But if you get into the highly compensated arena and making several $100,000 a year, $500,000, $1 million a year, all of a sudden you're not able to save effectively as much in that 401k plan in terms of a replacement ratio. And so the non-qualified deferred compensation plan can come in really as a substitute and help catch up to that. So you have that same type of ability to save on a pre-tax basis as the rank and file type people and the employees. I think we often see also in some smaller businesses, without going too far down the, the rabbit hole, there's ACP and ADP, actual deferral percentage, actual contribution percentage, rules around safe harbor 401k plans that sometimes business owners have a hard time meeting those requirements in their 401k plan if only the highly compensated people are contributing and are contributing a large amount versus the general population of employees. And so a deferred compensation plan could come in and say, hey, why don't you direct more dollars to this deferred compensation plan? It might make it easier to pass these tests in the 401k. I think that's something that would need to be carefully weighed, again, because of the risk that we're talking about versus the relative real security and strength of 401k plan assets. I think, Kevin, we've often seen other large corporations where there's like a restored match in the deferred compensation, right? I mean,
that's true. Yeah, oftentimes the folks that because there may be a differential between what is deemed rank and file and the executive population, that there's not enough money being put in from a Department of Labor standpoint that screw up, I suppose, is what happens on the deferred compensation side. So that's not uncommon, and probably just a good opportunity for employees to be taking advantage of.
Yeah. And then, back to the other thing you said, Derek, that lifestyle creep, that is super important. This is foundational. We know, we've seen it. We work with many folks in the back end who have done a great job of accumulating, and some simple techniques. People want to say, well, what was the investment strategy? What was the picks? What was the asset allocation? How heavy did you go in, small company stocks versus large? All that's important, but systematic savings, eliminating decision points and automating the savings is really incredibly powerful. It takes away, one extra thing on a busy person's to-do list to have to decide to put money in the market. It's kind of like you hear about some of these people we're all wearing nice blue shirts today, right? You hear about it was Steve Jobs who wore the same thing every day to take away that little decision point. And I think sometimes people will accumulate cash and then, the market's too high, you don't want to invest. They're looking for an entry point. Well, guess what? When it's low, it never feels like the right time to invest. It feels scary. Things don't look good. And automating that savings can be very powerful over time. We know it works on the accumulation side and simplifies things. We like to have a big formal planning meeting before year end, tax planning, think about cash flow, and to decide, in 2023, how much does it make sense to contribute in 2024? And the deferred compensation can simplify some of those decisions and help really provide a commitment to the plan and help us stay committed to buying low as opposed to the fear that tends to creep in those bad market cycles, and the lifestyle creep. The pay raises come, the big bonuses come. All of a sudden, people start getting kind of itchy trigger fingers with the checkbook and credit card, and all of a sudden that new boat looks pretty good, or the extra property. And I think, being ahead of that, and work in partnership to think about, our future goals funded? Have we established that baseline that's needed to meet future lifestyle goals, the really important core ones, before we kind of get into the impulse fun ones? That's a great thing. There's this term we talk about sometimes, the hedonic treadmill, right? Just lifestyle creep upward and upward and upward. And it's easier ahead of time to make thoughtful decisions about what do you really need and what is a want, versus when you let your lifestyle get elevated, it's quite painful, the feeling of going backwards. So no one likes that, myself included. So yeah. Well, that's great. And I think, some of these plans, we're typically talking about and thinking about retirement and retirement timeline, right, Derek? I mean, that's generally where the conversations are headed, but often we can elect an election period that is before retirement. So if someone has, significant college funding goals, I don't think this would be our first tactic to go towards. We'd, especially with the enhanced, flexibility on things like 529 plans. We talked about that recently in one of these sessions. There's other things we go to, but it could be looked at as a way of matching up cash flows with, vacation home purchase or relocation, college funding, things along those lines, and kind of a forced savings and savings commitment. So I think, one of the things that comes to mind, Kevin, we've many times worked and we're talking about timeline and matching things up, really think about creating a window in retirement, right? Someone separating from service, and then when do you claim Social Security? When would a pension come in? When are we going to sell this accumulated stock? How big of a window do we have? And, this option to designate deferred compensation payments at a certain point in time could play into that, don't you think?
100%. And I do think, well, I've probably said this a million times over the last 25 years. It's one of the pieces that really does matter in the holistic financial plan. So it is not unique to a general set of people. It's unique to you. And if we've had good conversations about where you want to retire, when you want to retire, what might be a reasonable life expectancy from claiming Social Security, et cetera. There are so many moving pieces that all come into backing into a decision like this, that if there's excess cash flow, you've maximized the flexibility that exists with, say, a 401k plan. But then beyond that, what is your commitment to your employer currently? And then what might that be over time? And when do you expect to need those funds longer term? And so it is, Scott, I might be misquoting you, but it's 3D chess underwater. It is, there are a lot of moving pieces and a lot to take into consideration. So the nuance is important, but yeah, you're exactly right that, utilizing one of these plans, if excess cash flow exists, can be extremely beneficial.
Yep. So the first thing we wanted to touch on is just using these plans as a general wealth accumulation tool, or to fund specific goals. And why is it powerful? Well, it's powerful because if it's properly designed and the rules are followed, you can put a large amount into the plan pre-tax, and it's tax deferred. You pay income tax when it comes out. So similar to other conversations we have with folks around things like 401k contributions, or the decision between a pre-tax or, say, an after-tax Roth contribution, this is a big one, and it can really be a big bucket. I mean, often these are written where you can put 100% of your compensation into these types of plans and spread it out over future years. And so if you're at a very high tax rate, it almost looks like you have a 50-50 partner, with the FICA, FUTA, the Fed, the state, all the different taxes that can come off the top of your income at higher rates, the state of Minnesota. And so if you look and say, well, I intend to be in a lower tax rate in the future or in retirement, it can look like a big win by not paying taxes on those dollars now, investing them, letting them grow, taking them out at a lower tax rate in the future. I think we see many times, even if it looks like you're at the same tax rate, it can be a win by having a tank where you're building up assets and the taxes are deferred on the dividends, interest, capital gains on those investments that are contained within that plan and drawn out over a period of time. It's kind of an interesting exercise. Sometimes you'll even say, well, we could actually have a more diversified or a more moderate portfolio, less volatility, and get the same effective return as if you had one outside that's not tax sheltered, where you are striving for a more aggressive footprint because you're paying taxes on capital gains are being kicked off, dividends and interest payments. So big potential win with the tax arbitrage, big potential win with just the amount that can be put into these types of plans. Derek, you mentioned investing, and that is what we're very commonly seeing with the major corporations with executives we're working with, but they're not all that way. Some of the plans are still more just like an interest rate crediting type plan, where the money that's held in the plan earns something that looks more like a savings account or a money market account. But happily, we see some that usually have pretty much the same investment options as in that employee's 401k plan. On the very attractive side, one corporation, major retailer we work with, actually has an earnings enhancement. So you can design a investment portfolio there and think about, okay, what do we want to hold in 401k? What do we want to hold in IRAs? What do we hold in a regular brokerage account? But the assets in the deferred compensation plan, up to certain limitations, have an actual crediting enhancement that can really juice the returns. And the way they view that is it's extra reward for the extra potential risk. So, yeah. Well, so that's really the main thing I think we want to emphasize, with people listening, is this is, if you've got a flyer, if you have a notice that, hey, end of November or early December, I mean, what are the dates we're typically seeing on these, Kevins, for election?
Well, it's coming up soon. So
yeah, this time of year.
Yep.
This time of year, a lot of people are thinking about pumpkin spice lattes and fall colors, and we start thinking about deferred compensation, right? I mean, that's what really gets us salivating, just the smell of that warm.
When my head hits the pillow, I'm only thinking about non-qualified deferred compensation this time of year.
Yeah. So first one to think about is just it can be a real powerful savings tool with a lot of potential tax advantages. Now, the other major strategy I think that we look at and evaluate a lot, Kevin, you and I have worked together in many cases in this situation where someone does have assets that have a large gain, and it might be a concentrated block of assets, something that we have some concerns. We'd like to see them be in a more diversified position. It's probably worked out very well for them, but we want to help them go from a position that was, high potential, and they happen to roll the dice and it worked out well. Maybe it's company stock, maybe it's that piece of real estate, maybe it's something else, maybe it's crypto, or who knows, some other type of asset that they want to sell, and get to a more high probability type approach, a more diversified approach. And as you mentioned, we talk about diversification a lot in risk management, and that is our main concern. But there's also, what we might consider opportunity costs. If you're very concentrated and narrowly focused, there's a whole lot of other ways to make money out there, and you want to, make sure your footprint captures some of those as well. But there's often a big hitch. Okay, boy, if I sell that big block of stock that I've held for decades, or next year I know restricted stock is vesting, and that's going to show up as ordinary income on my tax return. Or we have these stock options and we're thinking it looks very good. We've analyzed the options in terms of exercise price, where the company stock is at. We're looking ahead. There's often a big tax bill associated with that people aren't excited about. And so, Kevin, you want to walk us through maybe how we've paired up this decision to help with that planning situation?
Well, yeah. So great question, and an important planning tool or opportunity for a lot of our clients in the executive market. But when you have paired up executive compensation along with the availability of that deferred compensation plan, it does exist opportunity. So where you may otherwise need to be realizing significant tax considerations at the marginal rate, so 9.85 at Minnesota, so you're getting significant tax hit. However, if you proactively look to defer a significant part of your compensation. Otherwise, salary, oftentimes you can do salary or bonus compensation. Sometimes you can actually defer restricted stock units. There's, this is where we get into a lot of the nuance with the individual plans of the company that you work for. But when we go through that process to say, all right, we don't want to let the tax tail wag the dog. We know you've got a concentrated position, for example, where we need to reduce that. Let's look to defer a more significant portion of your portfolio. So the left pocket, right pocket is you're taking dollars from the exercise of options or maybe the sale of previously vested restricted stock units, what have you. You're now taking income from one pocket, but deferring it in the other, and then lowering your overall aggregate tax rate. So that top marginal rate, the arbitrage opportunity is potentially quite significant. And we've seen that with many folks. And sometimes that even comes into play with people needing to change jobs or, in layoffs or restructurings where money getting kicked out of these deferred compensation plans can then be re-deferred into a new plan or offset by signing bonus, et cetera. So.
Yeah, right. That's great. So it's typically not a direct transfer, other than you mentioned, like maybe restricted stocks. Some plans are allowed, but it's usually not a direct linkage. It might not even be the exact same tax characteristic, but it's more saying, let's look ahead. Let's do some planning. Here we are in 2023. To avoid constructive receipt and to follow the plan rules, this time of year, we have to make our deferral elections for 2024. Maybe we think about it and we say, oh, look at that. There's restricted stock units that are going to vest. You have no control over that. They're going to show up as ordinary income on your tax return in 2024. Yep. We can look to match up that dollar amount that's going to come in as ordinary income from restricted stock units vesting with a non-qualified deferred compensation deferral election to offset that gain. And just like you said, I love that left pocket, right pocket, going from a concentrated position with an embedded tax liability to a diversified position. Still tax liability, you're going to pay income tax when it comes out, but you're moving it way down the road. So that's a situation where the people don't often have control with like the restricted stock units. Stock options is usually a big decision point. We're looking at what's happening in the economy, what's happening in the markets. What do we think analysts think about the valuation of that stock? Okay, that's sort of the investment analysis hat. We're thinking about as a financial planner, well, gee, have you put away enough for the kids' college? Are you on track? Have you hit what we think is that estimated core capital need to fund retirement at your desired retirement date? No, maybe we should scrape some of these gains off that look pretty good from the options. That's what a financial planner had. But then the tax planning side saying, okay, we think we want to exercise next year. We'll often look at the specific grants because the different grants have different timeline. There's different amounts of leverage at play, and match those up with that deferred compensation election.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And I think, maybe one other facet is, has this client, has this employee previously used the plan? So somebody that may have a significant balance already built up where substantial risk of forfeiture, all of these other things that we might touch on here in more detail in a second, but that then comes into play. That do we want to layer on top of that? Oftentimes, 401k plans may have different allocations available for EDCP, this non-qualified deferred compensation piece, and the 401k. 401ks may have a self-directed option, giving us more flexibility on that asset allocation side. That doesn't exist with EDCP. And so, the balance of where we go with the next dollar, tax implications, asset allocation implications, potential tie-up from a deferral or disbursement, it all matters.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. Well, with that, I think, so we talked about, two major strategies or considerations of the plan: wealth accumulation and tax arbitrage or tax planning, and then this way to use it to help diversify someone's position. For the executive role, those are, I think, two big ones that come into play. I say there's a whole nother side of this that will very likely come back to in another session. That would be, as a business owner, does it make sense to evaluate this type of plan and put it into place? So a lot there. Before I forget, Kevin, you mentioned an interesting one. The change of control, the separation from service. These are some of the triggering events that can cause a payout, and we saw that a few years ago. Major employer in town. We worked with a number of executives who had been putting away considerable amounts in the deferred compensation plan, had nice growth, that deferred comp EDCP plan. And then, really what I guess could be considered a major shakeup at top level in the company. Happily, we still work with these executives, but they've scattered to the winds. They've ended up at different companies, but there they were mid-career. And happily, most of them found new positions pretty quickly, but often that new position was even a pay jump and sometimes a signing bonus, and maybe even put them in a higher tax bracket. And then here comes that trailing deferred compensation payout because they had a separation from service, or like say it can happen with a change in control, and that can be a mid-career triggering event that unexpectedly starts dumping out this taxable income. But what we saw in almost every case, I believe, is that the new employer also had a deferred compensation plan, and we were able to kind of soak up that overflow in the new plan and offset some of that extra taxable income. Is that how you remember it, Kevin?
Well, that's exactly right. So you're 100% right. But I also think, a little bit of maybe the wind at our back and good fortune for us and for our clients was at play there, because it is not a guarantee. And a lot of executives don't necessarily realize this. It's not a guarantee that your next employer has an EDCP plan available to you, or what your entry date might be, or whether it's salary plus bonus, what percentages are allotted for each of those components. So there are a lot of pieces at play, and that is it is part of the leap of faith when somebody elects to put money into the EDCP, is that if your employment is voluntarily or through a reduction of force, that if your employment is terminated, all of those termination elections that you had to select come into play. You don't get to keep these dollars in there forever. Now, retirement has a different set of elections and gives you a little bit more flexibility, but that has to be taken into account as you look to, for example, somebody that might be longtime corporate employee, but that is looking to, for sure, start their own business. We know through conversations they're going to be doing their own thing on an entrepreneurial basis. That might not be somebody that we want to automatically have in an EDCP plan, despite any of the other benefits, because that could trigger bigger issues. So some of the things that we think about as we talk big picture planning.
Yeah, I actually wrote a blog post on this exact issue. Its title is something along EDC, non-qualified deferred compensation plan gotcha. And it was kind of describing some of these experiences with the separation from service mid-career, and kind of outline some of those. So that's on my blog, scottoeth.com. But the other one, does the new employer, are they going to have a plan? It's not guaranteed, or you just might not like the plan. The plan might have poor investment options. Now, I think often we look at the tax advantage and say that might outweigh poor investment options, something to consider. The plan might not have the flexibility that you like. It might be funded with life insurance, which many of the smaller businesses are, and maybe that doesn't feel like the right fit after analysis, or just that key part that these dollars, the constructive receipt issue and that substantial risk of forfeiture and being an unfunded, unsecured promise to pay, maybe that next step is a smaller startup company. Maybe it's not as financially stable. We have one executive who's in a wind down process with, actually we have two right now that they're both high performers. They're doing great, but guess what? The company, it hasn't worked out and things are kind of unraveling, and it might not feel like the right fit to defer quite a bit of your compensation into a company plan where there's not that financial strength there. We're confident in it. We'll cherish you here. So I think we're all right. So, with that, Kevin, any other thoughts on the elections, considerations around what we think about when we're working with someone on plan elections?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, is so much of this is inherent in the overall plan, the conversation. And as the winds shift, we adjust, but getting a sense of what might be the appropriate election to make, because these are irrevocable unless they are changed, but that comes with separate consequences. So unlike a 401k plan, if you set out, let's just hypothetically say you're going to contribute 10% of your income to the 401k plan. Well, if next pay cycle you want to contribute 5 or stop, you have that flexibility. Committing to these non-qualified deferred compensation plans is a 1-year full cycle. And along with that, the amount you would put in, often attributable to salary and bonus, you also are selecting when you would get paid out. And so for some people, Scott, you made a good point and a great reference that, college planning could be a good example of, well, it looks like we're going to need some more income in a decade. The kids are getting close, and we know we want to fund X, Y, and Z dollar amount for them, but let's defer that along the way. And if that's your chosen path, then you could do that, set a date where money gets paid out. But anytime you change that comes with handcuffs. And so same with restrictions around deferrals on the back end. If you are to be retired, any of those incremental decisions along the way are also handcuffed. And so it's, maybe the point I want to make is making as good of a decision as you can on the front end is going to help you a lot with flexibility on the back end. And oftentimes in the event where you think you might not need it, you ought to probably choose sooner rather than later, because you can adjust further out, but you can't bring it further in.
Yeah, something we've talked about quite a bit, and trying to mull through the next great blog post on this. In financial theory in textbooks back in college, you're taught about something called the liquidity preference theorem, and that's usually specifically related to investments, like say on analyzing a bond investment. A rational investor, Derek and I were laughing about, we're not sure we ever find a true rational investor, but all things held equal would prefer more liquidity rather than less. Well, I think what we see in real life, and I haven't seen this really addressed this way, is just in the broader financial planning, decision-making, and tax planning, there's a lot of strategies out there and techniques promoted, products especially that are promoted, many coming from the insurance side of the world, that purport to offer tax advantages or investment advantages, but you really want to look very carefully at the liquidity side of thing. And I think what we've found, and having worked with clients over many years, many decades at this point, through lots of changes in life situations, economic situations, family situations, goals change, and having flexibility generally is something we put a tremendous premium on, aiming for the simpler, more flexible strategies that allow for bailout points, allow for plan B, allow for flexibility along the way, as opposed to locking someone in. So as much as we get excited about non-qualified deferred comp, EDCP plans, what you just laid out there, Kevin, is here we sit in 2023. Someone needs to make a decision for how much they're going to defer in 2024. They don't get to change that decision. That's happening. Maybe it's a bad year. Maybe it's a pandemic. Maybe they're sales based and their income's way down, but they've committed and they're like, wow, things are running very lean now. It's cutting into my household budget, whereas I thought I had a lot of excess cash. So there's that consideration. You're having to choose when the payout starts way down in the future. And then usually what type of time period, how long you want it paid out. Is it paid out in a lump sum? Is it paid out over 5 years? Is it paid out over 10 years? So you're really, in many cases, committing to 3 decision points here that we'd often like to retain flexibility on. So needs to be very carefully considered. Some of the plans in some situations allow for some flexibility, and I think we're on the same page. I mean, what are some of the things we often recommend, especially if you're starting to contribute to deferred compensation plan when you're looking at like the payout scheme?
Well, I think generally speaking, the payout scheme is one where if we had, for example, if we had a clear understanding that somebody wanted to be done working, retired by, say, age 60. Well, that's very different than somebody that is enjoying their career and wants to work till age 70, because we might have a nice 10-year window, for example, where they're not taking Social Security income. There are no required minimum distributions from their other retirement assets. And if they've accumulated a nice pool of non-qualified or taxable investment options, or may otherwise have rental income or some other income source, that might be a situation where we would say, gosh, you might want to try to take that income out over this 10-year period if you're 60 until 70 or 70, now 73 on that required minimum distribution part. But we want to try to pack in as much of the earned income that's going to land at a higher ordinary income rate as possible in years where it's as thin as it can be. Now, we could flip that whole equation on its head and say, gosh, somebody wants to work until they're 70, then, maybe we're trying to stretch it out again over 10 years after the fact, or perhaps there are significant expenses that they're going to retire at 70, but they want to buy a multi-million-dollar rental property. They're going to finally move to their dream vacation home. And so we know there's going to be this cash flow event, and perhaps syncing that up at that period of time might make the most sense. So a lot of balls to be juggling in the air, I suppose.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. I think as a general comment, many times, especially starting off with contributions to a plan like this, we'll say, well, let's aim to get the money back sooner rather than later. And so maybe electing something like a lump sum payout, 1 year following retirement. Why 1 year following instead of at retirement? Well, because you might get final bonus, you might get paid on vacation pay, you might have stock options, final options to sell, things along those lines. Maybe you're leaving and going to that new company where you'd have that signing bonus. So, the 1 year can allow for a gap, but still with the uncertainty, you're potentially getting the money back sooner rather than later. And then, as I think about over the years, many times we look at someone, okay, their wealth situation is building, the financial future is getting clearer, liabilities are being taken care of, the college has been paid, mortgages being paid down, 401k balances being built up, other assets are being built up, and then we can get a bit more aggressive in committing to longer payout. And something I'll mention, but this is one of the ones that you absolutely want to check your plan document, and the details is there may be the potential to essentially punt and spread the payments further out. If you make an election a year before the payout is due and spread it at least over 5 years, sometimes you can push those payments further out. But really after 409A, unless there's like a special hardship situation, you're not able to bring those payments forward. You're not able to take a loan like you could on a 401k plan. You're not able to roll these balances tax deferred into an IRA, which I think is important. Sometimes there's been some misunderstanding about. So all important considerations. Derek, if we're working with people who are eligible for these types of plans, this usually is not their only account. In fact, it's often the last account that we think about funding. They may have brokerage account, IRA, 401k, HSA plan, Roth IRAs. What do you what should we be thinking about in terms of how you invest in the deferred compensation plan?
Yeah, it all always comes back to planning, but at a high level, the choices that you're going to have for this particular account are going to be dictated by the plan. I'd say most of the plans that we come across, they often mirror what you see within your qualified defined contribution plan, like your 401k, or like you mentioned earlier, sometimes there's a different menu of choices. Sometimes you don't have much of a choice. So, a couple things you probably want to consider when you're selecting investments within the plan. Again, what is the plan for these dollars? How long do you have until retirement? As Kevin mentioned, do you have this gap where you maybe want to retire early? How do we, as those plan dollars are coming out, how much of a time frame do we have until that gap happens? Are they going towards a certain purpose at a certain date, or are they just going to general spending needs in retirement? So those are, high level, some of the things we're thinking about. But then we always talk about this in client meetings, really with tax location planning. So how do these assets within the plan fit within your overall portfolio mix? And, how does that look across all of your investment accounts? So where are you holding your equities? Where are you holding your bond positions? You want to be sensitive to the tax ramifications of where you're holding these particular assets. So if you're holding bond positions within a tax deferred account, that might be smart because you're not getting taxed on that income that's being kicked off each year. Maybe holding the more tax efficient investments within the brokerage accounts. So it's really marrying, if you do choose to add this type of plan, consult with us, consult with your advisors around you to really kind of determine what that proper asset mix is going to be. So those are just a couple things that we think about when we're looking at investing in these particular plans.
Yeah, that's a big one. It's many people, what we see is that they have a cookie cutter, sort of what their version of a model portfolio is in each account. And when we're working with new clients, we're often unwinding that, and we're ending up with chunky lopsidedness in these different types of accounts due to their different tax treatment, because we want to look as a household ideally and figure out how do we get the best, how do we try to optimize the after-tax spendable dollars that will eventually flow down in the checkbook. And what we see is really, it might make sense to hold certain assets in a tax deferred account like deferred comp or 401k, and different assets in Roth IRA. And then again, completely different holdings outside in a brokerage account. So big consideration, and there's been really interesting research on the the potential value over periods of time on this, and it's significant. Yeah, very significant. Along those lines, one unique situation that comes up from time to time is employees, executives sometimes have a stock retention requirement where they need to hold 1 times, 2 times their salary in the company stock, really sort of a show of commitment to the company and to make sure that they're financially vested and aligned. And this varies company by company. Sometimes that can be in stock options, sometimes it's direct stock. Sometimes it can be in stock actually chosen as an investment option in the deferred compensation plan. And as we do the what was it, underwater chess, Kevin, or the Rubik's Cube of these decisions, there's been cases where we've looked at it and said, let's hold that employee stock in the deferred compensation plan. So we're essentially stacking the risk element, risky concentrated asset in the riskier plan instead of spreading that risk across someone's overall financial landscape. But very specific case by case, seek your own expert advice before committing to that decision. So there is one other little point, Kevin, you're talking about, I just want to go back a minute, talking about distribution elections. We've had more and more conversations coming up after, rough winter and people paying their tax bills about dreams of relocating to warmer climes and maybe ones that are more friendly from a tax standpoint. And there's a detailed point there to consider, isn't there?
Well, so yeah, it's a good point, and we certainly all want Minnesota, where we're located, to thrive. But at the same time, nobody is looking to pay more than their fair share of tax, and so a unique aspect of both big picture planning consideration, but then the nuance of plan rules is if you are electing a payout, and so you could do a lump sum, you could do 5-year, but if you do a 10-year payout, usually the longest stretch that you can actually voluntarily elect is if your state of residency is different than where you earned the money. So an example is an executive here in town who may have deferred compensation in the state of Minnesota, where if they are successful and have significant income, that's a 9.85% top marginal rate for the state of Minnesota, almost 10%. We'll use easy math for me. But for a lot of our clients who may like sunnier climates and perhaps say move to Florida, that's a 0% state tax rate. And so if you're in constructive receipt of income coming out of one of those plans, dollars from your 401k, all of that is off to the side. But this EDCP, non-qualified deferred compensation piece, that may be not taxable at the state level if you are now a resident of a new state where state tax does not exist. And so there's, a handful of options there that we might typically see, but that, we did talk about the 3D underwater chests or what have you, but the fact that there are a number of competing interests involved here, it does matter because the amount of money that you might want to take for a specific purpose or over a specific period of time based on when Social Security would start, when a pension might begin getting paid out, that could also get trumped by the fact that if you elect a longer payout on your EDCP, which may be kicking the can down the road a bit, but that could end up being state tax free, which could be a very meaningful part of your plan.
Yeah, thanks for shining the light on that. We did about a year ago did a pretty in-depth webinar session like this specifically on state residency planning, and that's posted on my blog on scottoeth.com and can share that with folks. But yeah, there again, area where you need your own expert advice and really evaluate it, but potentially significant tax arbitrage there if you're going from high tax state where they're collecting 8, 9, 10% or more, even in certain areas, to one of the tax-free zones or lower tax zones. So lots of considerations. I think, we think about, have people contributed to their 401k, their 403b, their standard retirement plans? I think, we need to take a look at, is the company financially secure? Are you comfortable with the financial risk of that unsecured, unfunded promise to pay and the substantial risk of forfeiture? I think you need to take a careful look at the flexibility or lack thereof in the plan design. And does that work for you? We talked about that liquidity preference and how that probably comes into play until you've reached a certain level of wealth, until you're comfortable maybe that a baseline of goals are funded with very flexible liquid type strategies as opposed to ones that are illiquid. Distribution schedule, investment options. We talked about that a bit with Derek, very, very important. What we're seeing is many of the plans, it looks just like 401k. That's usually pretty good, maybe not optimal, but the tax benefit is great enough that it works. But some of these plans are still more of an interest rate crediting type pool of assets. And you need to really decide, does the plan make sense for you? Are you comfortable with locking up the funds for that period of time? And what could go wrong? The upside is often apparent, but we need to consider the risk. So, with that, I guess just to recap, we see, the real big strategies of just a large accumulation vehicle with a tax preference, like Derek talked about, systematizing that savings and committing to it and avoiding that lifestyle creep or that hedonic treadmill. And, Kevin helped us really think about how this might be a tool in special circumstances or even ongoing to help diversify concentrated, riskier positions, maybe highly leveraged positions in the form of like stock options, and offset that tax with, moving money into a more diversified pool in the deferred compensation plan. So a lot to talk about. Feel free to get in touch with us. I think you can see this is one of the cases where three brains are better than one, and we worked on a lot of these cases together. It is part of our specialty in working with corporate executives, and we've got some great tools that we can dive into on the tax planning and financial planning side and stock option analysis side to support all of this. And we have a pretty extensive library on my blog that has a number of lots of other investment and general planning topics, but many specifically focused on planning for executives. So with that, anything else we should touch on, guys?
Nothing that comes to mind on my end. Yeah. If you have questions, please reach out.
All right. Well, it's been great. Thank you all. And until next time, see you soon.